Hi everyone, this is Benjamin Rogers, and for my EBP presentation, I will be presenting on story mapping. So welcome. Today I wanted to talk about story mapping and its success with students with and without disabilities. In this video, I hope to outline the major concepts of story mapping and what it could entail within your classroom. Alongside this, I want to present you with some information regarding what research has been done to support story mapping and what you might need to help implement it in your classroom teaching style. To begin, let's talk about what story mapping is. Story mapping has been an effective strategy for struggling readers for some time within the classroom as well as independently. A story map uses a graphic organizer as a tool the student may use to organize elements of a narrative. With this strategy, a teacher may help students locate these elements, such as characters, conflicts, settings, themes, and conclusions, to better understand the relevant information with a visual. By doing so, teachers can better help improve students' comprehension and provide students with a framework of sorts that they may use to better understand narratives while also developing an understanding of organizing information and ideas. So why is this knowledge important? As students better understand a narrative and its text structures, they can begin to apply that information when they approach other assignments, which may relate directly to future careers, opinions, and future schooling. Additionally, helping students understand different types of texts can greatly improve their reading comprehension. Story mapping can be a useful tool at all grade levels, but information from different grade levels will differ greatly and therefore instruction also must differ. Story mapping at the elementary level may only look at aspects of a narrative in the form of questions, but at the middle grade level, students are often comfortable with various elements of a narrative and may identify multiple aspects of one element within a single narrative. Additionally, as teachers, we can introduce new elements with older students, such as themes, other conflicts, subplots, metaphors, etc. This can enhance comprehension in students with or without disabilities. In Grace Meo's article on curriculum planning for all learners, she states how many students, including those without disabilities, struggle with accessing the general curriculum because of reading comprehension difficulties. And, in fact, a great majority of students with learning disabilities experience difficulty in reading comprehension. Students with learning disabilities who struggle with reading comprehension comprise about 80% of students identified with learning disabilities. There are several factors as to why so many students with learning disabilities have difficulty with reading comprehension. Drew E. Narkson and Jenny C. Wells state that many of the students with learning disabilities have deficits in working memory, transfer of knowledge, and information processing. Therefore, students with learning disabilities, as well as those who have fallen behind in reading comprehension, may be at severe disadvantage when it comes to comprehending meaning from text. Story mapping has proved to be a useful tool for working with students with learning disabilities and those without learning disabilities. Here are a few studies I found particularly interesting. One study was conducted for 8 weeks with 30 12 to 16-year-old adolescents with ADHD. Students' recollection of narratives was assessed before and after the story mapping intervention. After the intervention, fable recalls included more of the most important events, were more coherent, and included a great number of plausible inferences than pre-test fable recalls. Another study was conducted with students from the 3rd grade, 4th grade, and 6th grade with learning disabilities. During the study, the use of story mapping and its effects on the students' comprehension of the narrative's elements were monitored. Since reading is a common deficient skill area, the study was done to observe the possibility of positive results being received from story mapping within the special education system. It was found that the study supports story mapping instruction as an effective means of increasing narrative text comprehension for students with learning disabilities. This conclusion largely came from story mapping being seen to improve the participants' identification of various narrative elements. But how can we implement it? Story mapping can easily be implemented within a classroom lesson and may utilize a graphic organizer on a worksheet or online. Here are some steps to implement it within your regular curricula. First, you're going to want to select a narrative. Begin by selecting a narrative that students may read along with the class or on their own depending on grade level. You are also going to want to consider what grade level students' own reading comprehension may be at and to adjust your choices of narrative accordingly. Your individual school district, state government, or organization may also have some great resources for what books may and may not be appropriate, so be sure to confer with these beforehand. Also, for those planning to work in New York, Engage New York has a text list for a variety of grade ratios. Secondly, you want to introduce your students to the idea of story mapping. Since story mapping is visual, it can be simple to explain where to pull specific information within the graphic organizer. But ultimately, you want students to organize their thoughts based upon the principles of narrative. These may include, but are not limited to, conflict or problems, characters, setting, themes, events, conclusions, and/or the resolution. So do you want to implement this individually, in groups, or as a class? At the middle school level, it can be beneficial to utilize worksheets rather than a more technical online resource for using the graphic organizers to story map. Thoughts may be organized on worksheets individually or within groups depending upon the learning disabilities prevalent within the classroom and the use of group-centered learning versus individual learning within the classroom. Be sure to consider the positives of group work and how this activity may also allow for some social learning. Don't be overwhelmed. Looking at a story map with its various groupings may feel overwhelming, and students should not feel pressured to focus on the entire graphic organizer as a whole until it is complete. Focus on the beginning, middle, and end of the story to better limit what students may focus on as to not feel overwhelmed. Attached are some great examples of worksheets that you may choose to utilize within your classroom. Students may simply divide the story into parts at lower levels of comprehension, whereas students in higher levels of comprehension may begin to look specifically at different types of characters, characteristics, contents, events, responses, etc. And thank you for staying here along with me. Here's a few of my references that I used for my studies and various articles. And there's also some great resources here for further reading that you can utilize for implementing story mapping into your own classroom with various different tips and techniques and tricks.